What happens after we die? Rebirth, reincarnation, and resurrection. Three radically different answers to the same question. Ladies and gentlemen,
The world we inhabit is, in many ways, remarkably clear.
we can measure it, map it, quantify it, and explain much of its behavior with extraordinary precision. And yet, beneath this apparent clarity lies a profound and unsettling mystery, one that no civilization, no philosophy, and no scientific paradigm has ever fully resolved. That mystery is death. More specifically, it is the question of what, if anything, comes after death. Is life a single, unrepeatable event, bounded absolutely by birth on one side and death on the other? Or is death not an ending at all, but a threshold, an opening into another form of existence, another chapter in a longer journey? This question is not marginal. It is not a theological curiosity reserved for monks or mystics. It is one of the deepest structural questions shaping how human beings understand morality, responsibility, suffering, hope, and meaning itself. From Plato's dialogues to Augustine's confessions, from Eastern metaphysics to modern existential psychology, human beings have returned to this question again and again, not because it is comforting, but because it is unavoidable. Today's lecture begins precisely at this point. Why did human beings across cultures that never contacted one another imagine that something continues after death? Why did some cultures speak of endless cycles, others of returning souls, and still others of a final resurrection at the end of time? And perhaps most importantly, why do we so often assume that these ideas are essentially the same, when in fact they are built upon radically different assumptions about the self, the soul, and the structure of reality? In everyday language, we casually group together terms like rebirth, reincarnation, and resurrection, as if they were merely cultural variations on a single theme. But philosophically speaking, this is a serious mistake. The moment we distinguish these concepts carefully, something remarkable happens. We begin to see that each tradition is answering a fundamentally different question, not merely about life after death, but about what a human being truly is. Is the self a stable entity that persists unchanged through time? Is it a stream of consciousness shaped by causes and conditions? Or is it a singular, irreplaceable individual whose destiny culminates in a final moment of cosmic judgment? Each answer generates an entirely different vision of ethics, suffering, justice, and salvation. In this lecture, I invite you to take a journey with me, a journey that crosses civilizations, centuries, and disciplines. Together, we will explore how the soul is imagined to move, to return, or to rise again. We will draw not only from ancient religious texts, but also from philosophy, psychology, and comparative religious study, in order to illuminate what is truly at stake in these ideas. Before we proceed, let me briefly say this. This channel exists to help you engage deeply with philosophy, religion, and psychology, not as abstract theories, but as living frameworks that shape how we interpret our own lives. If you find this lecture meaningful, I encourage you to subscribe and support the channel. Your engagement allows us to continue producing thoughtful, rigorous content that resists simplification and invites genuine reflection. Now, let us begin in earnest. Where does the soul begin again? Good evening. Human beings have asked for thousands of years, what happens after we die? Does consciousness disappear, or does it transform? If we return, what determines the form that return takes? Virtually every civilization has imagined some version of coming back. Yet what is astonishing is not that these ideas exist, but how fundamentally different they are. What we commonly label as samsara, reincarnation, and resurrection are not variations of the same belief. They are answers to different metaphysical problems, constructed within entirely different worldviews. Let us begin with samsara. often translated as rebirth or cyclical existence. In its original Sanskrit sense, samsara means to flow, to wander, or to move continuously. It does not describe a soul traveling intact from one body to another. Rather, it refers to an ongoing cycle of becoming a repetitive movement through birth, life, death, intermediate states, and rebirth. In Buddhist philosophy, this cycle is not governed by divine judgment or moral reward in the conventional sense. Instead, it operates according to karma, understood not as punishment or compensation, but as causal continuity. Anger gives rise to conditions where anger flourishes. Attachment generates environments that reinforce attachment. Wisdom, generosity, and clarity produce correspondingly different conditions of existence. Crucially, what continues is not a permanent soul, but a pattern, a tendency, a momentum of consciousness shaped by past actions. From this perspective, the self is not a fixed object, but a process. Death, therefore, is not a rupture, it is a transition. And rebirth does not occur instantaneously. Many Buddhist traditions describe an intermediate state, known as bardo, during which consciousness dissolves and reorganizes before entering a new form of existence. Tibetan Buddhism speaks of this period lasting up to 49 days, while other traditions describe the transition as nearly immediate. What matters here is not timing, but structure. Samsara is a closed loop. Its ultimate purpose is not continuation, but liberation. The goal is nirvana, or moksha, freedom from the cycle itself. Now contrast this with reincarnation. Reincarnation assumes something that samsara explicitly denies: a stable, enduring soul. In this model, the same individual essence inhabits multiple bodies across time. The soul survives death intact, carrying its identity and sometimes even its memories into future lives. This view appears in various forms, from Hindu and Jain traditions to Pythagorean philosophy and Platonic thought. Plato famously argued that learning is not acquisition, but recollection, that the soul once knew all truths and forgets them upon entering the body. From this standpoint, life is a school. Failure and suffering are not meaningless. They are lessons. The soul reincarnates in order to mature, refine itself, and ultimately reach completion. Here, death is not an escape from the self, but a pause in its long education. Finally, we arrive at resurrection, a concept that belongs to an entirely different metaphysical universe. In the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, resurrection is not cyclical, and it is not repetitive. It happens once, at the end of time. Resurrection does not involve a new body or a different identity. It is the same person, fully restored, fully recognized, and fully accountable. The emphasis here is not on growth across lives, but on justice, on judgment, on the final reconciliation of moral order. The resurrected body is not a repaired version of the old one, but a transformed, incorruptible form suited for eternal existence, where samsara seeks liberation from existence and reincarnation seeks perfection through existence. Resurrection affirms existence itself as ultimately meaningful. These three visions are not merely theological differences. They reflect profoundly different answers to what it means to be human. And as we continue this lecture, we will see how these differences shape not only beliefs about death, but how we live, choose, suffer, and hope in the present moment. Today, I would like to invite you into one of the oldest and most profound conversations humanity has ever held with itself. It is a conversation that begins not with life, but with death, and more precisely, with what we believe happens after death. Across civilizations, cultures, and religious traditions, human beings have returned to the same haunting questions. Do we simply vanish when life ends, or does something of us continue? If so, what continues, why, when, and by whose authority? In attempting to answer these questions, humanity has produced three of the most influential and enduring concepts in religious and philosophical history: reincarnation, rebirth, and resurrection. At first glance, these ideas appear to describe the same thing, being born again. But beneath the surface, they reveal radically different worldviews about morality, identity, responsibility, hope, and the structure of reality itself. Tonight, we will explore how these three concepts operate, what psychological needs they address, and why they continue to shape human thought, even in a scientific age. Three mechanisms of being born again. Let us begin by clarifying the principles behind each concept. Reincarnation, as understood in classical Indian and Buddhist traditions, is governed by karma, the moral law of cause and effect. Your actions, intentions, and ethical choices create consequences that do not end with a single lifetime. They ripple forward, shaping the conditions of the next existence. Here, rebirth is not a reward or a punishment administered by a divine judge. It is the natural outcome of accumulated causes, much like gravity operates regardless of belief. In this framework, the universe is morally intelligible, but impersonally governed. No external deity intervenes to reset the system. Responsibility is absolute, continuous, and inescapable. Rebirth, as often discussed in ancient philosophy, Platonic thought, and various Eastern spiritual traditions, operates on a different axis. Here, the emphasis is not moral accounting, but spiritual development. The soul is imagined as a traveler, returning again and again, not because it must repay debts, but because it must learn. Life becomes a classroom. Failure becomes curriculum. Suffering becomes instruction. The question is not, what did I do wrong? But rather, what has my soul not yet understood? Resurrection, by contrast, stands apart from both of these systems. In the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, resurrection is not a cycle, nor a gradual ascent. It is a singular, decisive, and transcendent act. Here, human effort, karma, or spiritual maturity does not bring one back. Resurrection occurs solely by divine will. It is not continuity by law. It is not evolution by experience. It is recreation by grace. In this worldview, death does not mark another stage of the journey. It marks an interruption that will ultimately be overcome. 4 questions that divide entire civilizations. Although reincarnation, rebirth, and resurrection all speak of return, they diverge completely when we ask 4 foundational questions. 1. What is reborn? 2. When does rebirth occur? 3. Why does rebirth happen? 4. Who decides it? Reincarnation answers. What returns is the causal stream of actions and consciousness. It occurs according to karmic law. It happens because causes demand consequences. No one decides, it simply unfolds. Rebirth answers. What returns is the soul or higher self. It occurs when learning remains incomplete. It happens for the sake of growth. The soul itself participates in the process. Resurrection answers. What returns is the whole person, restored. It occurs at a divinely appointed time. It happens to fulfill divine justice and hope. God alone decides. These are not minor theological differences. They represent entirely different moral universes. Death reinterpreted. Accordingly, each tradition interprets death itself in a radically different way. In reincarnation, death is a transition, one phase in an endless causal process. In rebirth, death is a relocation, the soul changing classrooms. In resurrection, death is a temporary defeat destined to be overturned. These interpretations shape how people endure suffering, understand injustice, and assign meaning to sacrifice. Why humans imagine being born again. Now let us step back and ask a deeper question. Why does the human mind generate these ideas at all? From a psychological perspective, scholars often identify two fundamental human needs that give rise to afterlife narratives. The first is the need for continuity. We struggle to accept total annihilation. The idea that everything we are, our memories, loves, efforts, simply disappears is emotionally intolerable for many. The second is the need for meaning. If suffering ends in nothingness, then pain feels arbitrary. If effort leads nowhere, then morality becomes fragile. Reincarnation, rebirth, and resurrection each provide a framework that answers these needs differently but effectively. Modern science and the question of consciousness. What does modern science say? Strictly speaking, science has not proven reincarnation, rebirth, or resurrection. However, certain areas of research continue to challenge materialist assumptions. Studies of near-death experiences, NDEs, research into children reporting past life memories, notably by psychiatrist Ian Stevenson, and ongoing debates about the non-local nature of consciousness, have reopened philosophical discussions about whether consciousness is reducible to brain activity alone. While none of this constitutes proof, it has re-legitimized an ancient question. Is consciousness entirely produced by the brain, or does the brain receive, filter, or express something more fundamental? Philosophy and consciousness studies increasingly acknowledge that. This question remains open. Different languages for the same mystery. What becomes clear is this: religions are not merely competing explanations of the afterlife. They are cultural languages developed to make sense of death. Buddhism speaks the language of causality. Ancient philosophy and Eastern spirituality speak the language of development. Abrahamic faiths speak the language of hope and redemption. These systems are not necessarily contradictory. They are interpretive lenses shaped by history, culture, and psychological priorities. The shared message. Despite their differences, these traditions converge on three profound assertions. 1. Death is not the end. 2. Existence continues in some meaningful form. 3. Life carries ethical and spiritual weight. Where they differ is in how responsibility operates, how hope is grounded, and where ultimate authority lies. The ethical messages they leave us. Reincarnation teaches us every choice echoes beyond the present moment. Responsibility is inescapable. Life is interconnected. Rebirth teaches us life is a school for the soul. Failure is not final. Pain is not pointless. Resurrection teaches us hope outruns despair. Even death does not have the final word, a final reflection. Ultimately, reincarnation, rebirth, and resurrection are different answers to the same ancient human question. Where do I come from and where am I going? They remind us that human beings are not creatures satisfied with survival alone. We seek coherence. We seek meaning. We seek assurance that our lives participate in something larger than accident. Whether interpreted as karmic continuity, spiritual evolution, or divine restoration, the shared message is unmistakable. Human existence is not disposable. Our choices matter. Our lives resonate beyond the moment. And perhaps the most important implication is this: this moment right now is not insignificant. Every decision, every response to suffering, every ethical choice creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can immediately see. If today's lecture has widened your perspective even slightly, if it has encouraged you to view death not merely as fear, but as a subject worthy of reflection, then this time has served its purpose. On this channel, we will continue exploring life through the lenses of classical wisdom, philosophy, psychology, and spirituality, always with the aim of deepening understanding rather than offering easy answers. If this lecture resonated with you, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and enabling notifications. Your engagement allows these conversations to continue. Thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing you again in our next lecture.